Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first of a virtual series of dialogues that the Tropical Forest Alliance is planning over the next few months. My name is Justin Adams. I have the huge honor and pleasure of being the Executive Director of the TFA, and I am delighted that we've got so many of you joining us this afternoon. As I said, this is the first in a series of dialogues that we hope or we will be running over the next few months. Originally, this is the time of the year that we would have been having a physical annual meeting. And obviously with the COVID situation, we are not having a physical meeting this year, but we are having a number of events. As you can see from this timeline, we're planning things that are happening for each of the regions. So much is going on in Latin America and Africa and Southeast Asia, China, and indeed in Europe, that that we're going to be building this sort of drumbeat of action to, I think, what's going to be a really important year in 2021 for the nature agenda, for the climate agenda, for the food agenda. And of course, we touch on all of those things with the work on commodities and deforestation. So this today is really the event where we're going to be talking about what's happening on demand side regulation. For those of you who've seen what we launched earlier this year, the collective action agenda, I'm not going to walk through this. This is available on our website. But at the base of the collective action agenda, it says that a lot has been achieved on deforestation. A lot's been achieved with companies in their supply chains. They all need to step up and do more, and the pressure on those companies is indeed intensifying. But the voluntary corporate action is going to be insufficient on its own. We need more action in producer countries, demand side countries, and from the finance sector. And that's really what this collective action agenda is all about. And today, we are focused on how we can advance demand side measures, and specifically in Europe, which is such an important market, as well as such a leading economy in terms of sustainability, in terms of climate. We're focused on really how we can advance demand side measures here in the EU. Just a year ago, the European Commission talked about what it was looking to do, and we'll be hearing from the Commission today about their work to look at regulating for imported deforestation. Through conversation with the Commission and with the great contribution we had from First Vice President Timmermans at the New York Climate Week last year and the TFA event, the TFA was asked to convene a series of dialogues to bring perspective from the private sector and to bring perspective from civil society to see how we could inform the discussions that the EU is going to be moving forward with. And so I'm delighted that that's what we've done with the help of EFICA. A series of 10 roundtables has taken place since the beginning of the year. Obviously, originally they were also planned physically, but I think they've done an extraordinary job of convening these meetings virtually. We've had more than 120 participants from 80 different organizations. More than 60% of each of these meetings has been with private sector participation, so really great engagement from the company side. And that's shaped a series of outputs that we'll hear more about through this dialogue today. And really what we're calling for is a smart mix of measures. There is no single silver bullet. And so this has been put together in a publication that's available now on our website. The link is there. And I would encourage everyone to dig into that. It's full of, I think, really important insights on how regulation can complement the work of private sector and how indeed private sector can work in partnership with regulators, and how important it will be that the work that is done on demand side countries complements work in producer countries, and that partnership will sit at the center of that. So that's what we're here to do. We hope you will join us for the future dialogues and the future series of events that we have coming up. But for now, I am very delighted to hand you over to Nicole Schwab, who's the co-director of the Nature-Based Solutions team at the World Economic Forum who will be moderating us this afternoon or the morning, depending where you're joining from. So thank you so much, Nicole.
Thank you, Justin. Welcome, everybody. I'm delighted to be your moderator for this session. We're going to have some very interesting interventions from a number of panelists. But before I give you a little idea of the agenda, just a few housekeeping rules. The chat function has been disabled, but we encourage you all to ask questions by using the Q&A tab, and you can post your questions at any time, and you can also vote on other people's questions by liking them, and that way the top questions will be upvoted and we will take these in the Q&A later on in the call. So on the agenda today, we will hear from the European Commission on its efforts to reduce imported deforestation. We then have three private sector perspectives on these TFA EU roundtable findings. We will then turn to the civil society to hear from that perspective as an input as well. And then finally, we will turn to the German presidency of the Council of the EU for their contribution and input. We will then have a chance for a Q&A, and before closing, we will have reactions from the European Commission. So, to start with, so we have some fantastic panelists today, and I will introduce them one by one just before their respective interventions. So you can have a look on the slide, but then I will say a little bit more about each as we go through this webinar. So to start with, and I think he has joined us now, I would like to turn to Hugo Schally, who is heading the Multilateral Environmental Cooperation Unit at DG Environment of the European Commission. And the DG Environment is the lead DG on forest policy and has been responsible for the deforestation communication and the impact assessment process that is currently underway. Mr. Schally, we're very much looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for joining a little bit late, but my computer refused to let me into Zoom, so I had to revert back to my iPad, which has a little bit of a problem because I had a small PowerPoint presentation prepared, where I was going to share on screen, but I can't now. So but I'll be easy to do it without. Now, looking at the program of the event today, I of course have to confess that I looked over something that I should have objected to from the very beginning, which is the title of my intervention, and it's entirely my fault. We are not talking about efforts to reduce imported deforestation in the context of the action plan that we have published in July 2019. We're actually talking about mainly reducing the consumption footprint on global forests stemming from EU consumption of products that may be linked and associated with deforestation and forest degradation, which of course is not limited to imported deforestation, but something that we need to look at in a holistic way, to look at what we can do with regard to reducing this one. Now, having said that, I think what really this is all about in the context of the Commission's action is how do we make a contribution from the EU's perspective to reducing the pressure on forests globally. And when you look into the communication of July 2019, this takes on a number of elements. One is looking at the demand side, meaning what is the impact of EU consumption on forests globally. Second part, what can we do to work with partner countries worldwide to incentivize them to make a transition to a more sustainable agricultural practices and the more sustainable use of forest resources. The third one is like, how can we actually sort of look into doing something at the multilateral level through different multilateral agreements and fora to advance that, and how can we actually improve knowledge and improve the monitoring of the situation. Now, today obviously is focusing on the first of those, which is on the demand side, to see how can we actually devise effective measures to reduce the EU consumption footprint on global forests. And I just want to go through 4 issues in that regard. In the original communication, we had a very neutral formulation that we would assess the feasibility and desirability of legislative and non-legislative options to minimize or reduce the risk of products related to deforestation, forest degradation put on the EU market. Now, when you look at the biodiversity strategy and the farm to fork, that language has become successively more assertive, and we are now looking at something that is much more straightforward, mainly that we're looking at a range of options, how we can actually do that. And it's very clear that it is likely to be a legislative proposal of some sorts. And we are currently conducting that, and this proposal process is supported by 2 supporting mechanisms. One is the impact assessment of regulatory and non-regulatory options for additional demand side measures. And the other, since we have to look back and say, what have we achieved since 2003 when we started the FLEGT action plan? What have we achieved through the work of the EU timber regulation and the FLEGT regulation in that regard? What has worked, what has not worked, where can we improve? And of course, in the context of the impact assessment, does the system established for dealing with legality actually lend itself to dealing with issues related to sustainability and land use change, where we are definitely on less safe grounds with that regard? We are looking at a range of options that could be part of that legislative proposal. And that would include, of course, based on the experiences so far, whether due diligence is the right approach. Also looking at what actually is due diligence and what are the components of an effective due diligence system, and how does the common law concept of due diligence actually compare to Roman law concepts that are prevalent in the EU today, because we have, I think, 2 smallish member states who have links to the common law systems that remain within the EU, or 3 if you count Cyprus. And how does that work with the judiciary systems of member states such as France, Italy, Spain, Austria, Germany, that are firmly rooted in the Roman law system, where we have seen consistently huge problems in its application. We were looking at what could be the contribution of certification systems and standards to such an issue. What would be the contribution to a future system of mandatory labeling to cover the consumer perspective? And of course, how can we use other systems that we have developed within the EU? And here what comes to mind in the first place is, of course, the mechanisms that are used in the context of the IUU fisheries approach. And I think clearly here there is an issue of whether we get into the business of assessing the environmental and deforestation performance of jurisdictions in our partner countries. Now, the process has started, and the Commission work program shows that we are aiming at putting forward a proposal in the first half of 2021. For that purpose, we will be launching rather broad-based consultation processes, and there will be 2 public open consultations on the fitness check of the EUTR and the FLEGT regulation, and on the impact assessment that will happen as of August to gather stakeholders' opinion on the potential demand-side measures at the EU level to tackle deforestation. The results of the impact assessment and the fitness check should begin to crystallize towards the end of 2020, beginning of 2021. And then we're looking forward to a proposal to be put forward in the first half of 2021. This proposal will be developed in close cooperation of a range of Commission services, not least those services that are working on related initiatives. On the one hand, DG Environment is working on related initiatives in the context of the Circular Economy Action Plan, the so-called Green Claims Initiative that has a similar target time-wise. And then we have a range of initiatives under Farm to Fork, which link to transparency, origin transparency of the environmental impact, transparency of the organic origin of certain food products. And I think that it's important to make the link with those different initiatives and the nature of these initiatives, not to forget, of course, the yet to be formalized idea for a legislative initiative of DG Just, where we are currently discussing with DG Just the inception impact assessment that should be come online in a couple of days or weeks, whatever it takes to finalize that one. And I think we need to look at the level of specificity of some of those initiatives, whereas some of those initiatives are classical transparency initiatives. Others will be initiatives of very horizontal level that will deal with an extension of corporate social responsibility and integration of environmental and social standards into overall corporate policy, to very specific measures regarding specific products and specific value chain, which includes very clear impact on market access with regards to certain products. And I think that's all a very exciting process, and we are really thrilled by the level of excitement that has generated with stakeholders, looking at the number of discussion work streams that are happening and the number of offers that we get to help us in our assessment work, or I would say some parallel assessment work that is going on with many stakeholders. And I think we will, of course, look carefully at all those as they come along. And we're, of course, also working very closely with the European Parliament in the follow-up to the draft legislative recommendation, the so-called Burkhardt report that has been presented in the European Parliament lately. And I think we've been discussing this already with a good number of MEPs, be they rapporteurs, shadow rapporteurs of all different committees. So I think that's where we stand. And I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion this afternoon, and looking forward to listening in the first place to the ideas that stakeholders will be put forward. And you're kindly allowing me to provide a short reflection on that one at the very end. And I remain, of course, available throughout the discussion for questions that would be put to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schally, for laying out all the actions that you're undertaking. And yes, we look forward to the discussion and being able to also ask you some questions further on. But first, I'd like to turn to some private sector perspectives. And first, we're going to hear from Marta Zuluaga-Zilberman, who is VP of Government Relations for EMEA at Cargill. Cargill, as most of you probably know, is one of the world's largest commodity traders. And Cargill has been actively engaged in the TFA EU roundtables. Marta.
Thank you. Thanks, Nicole. Hello, everybody. And we really appreciate the opportunity to contribute today. And indeed, as you said, the wider process of dialogue that TFA has been conducted over the last few months, and that has given rise to a lot of interesting ideas and conversations. I think building up on what Justin and also Mr. Schally said, I think tackling deforestation, we all know that is a very complex matter, and that any lasting solutions must really recognize and the needs and the concerns as well of a wide variety of stakeholders, starting with the farmers, but the communities, also customers, consumers, and we need to ensure forest protection within sustainable and inclusive development as well. Just to give a few examples, I mean, indeed, as Cargill, we did start this journey already a long time ago, and as a company, we remain firmly committed to transforming our agriculture supply chains to be deforestation and conversion free through prioritized supply chain actions, really looking at commodity by commodity, and also time-bound action plans. And we believe that solutions need to address both protecting environment as well as helping farmers retain their ability to earn a living. So we have recently also shared some status reports or progress reports of the actions that we have undertaken in some of our key supply chains. So just to mention a few highlights of what a company, for instance, like Cargill is doing in this space. So on the cocoa sector, we have, thanks to the use of barcoded cocoa bags and our digital cooperative management system, we have been able to trace basically about 50% of our sustainable cocoa beans on a global level from the farm to the factory. And we've also recently published interactive maps of the co-ops with whom we work in our direct supply chains to also understand which areas may be at risk of deforestation and how to mitigate those risks through really very localized and specific interventions, I would say. In the palm sector, we have achieved 90% traceability to the meal and also 48% to plantations. And we have an objective and our goal to achieve 100% traceability to plantations by the end of 2020. And this is really focusing on the high priority landscapes. And the idea is also by using this risk calibrated approach that we're able to understand what is the situation, what is really happening on the ground, and then be able to redirect resources to those areas that are most needed and where we can work on collaborative landscape actions on the ground with the smallholder communities as well. And then of course, soy, we remain firmly committed as a company to the Amazon soy moratorium, which is a crucial means of protecting that specific biome. We conduct independent audits of all the soy purchases that we have within our supply chain, just to make sure that no soy enters our supply chain comes from producers that do not comply with that soy moratorium. And more widely, I mean, we have completed just recently the mapping of oral Brazil supply chain with geo-referenced single points. And this has enabled us for the first time to really calculate the share of soy in Brazil that is grown on land that is deforestation and also conversion free. So I think the point that I'm wanting to come across here is that there's a lot of action happening, but we still have more to do. And indeed, we cannot be complacent. There's a lot more that we need to do. And I think just building on what Justin said earlier, while the progress can be strong, and ours and many other companies are involved and industry players across the board in the supply chain, I think indeed we do need some collective action also coming from governments, both at demand side as well as the producer side. And so this calls for this new approach on collective action that really puts the food, land use, and also nature-based solutions at the center of these efforts, including building long-term multilateral partnerships with producer, consumer country governments, also finance sector was mentioned earlier, business, as of course civil society, as well as developing. I mean, we need to understand what are this shared roadmaps that we need to really tackle problems in each of the supply chains and the forestry commodities. And then I think, and this, what I'd like to call for is the call for action. What comes next is really, so when it comes to the EU, we really welcome the EU's attention and the efforts on combating deforestation, and we're interested to continue participating, contributing with our experience on the ground on this. And I think while the EU's attention on commitment to intervention, as Mr. Shally was putting, is really a positive step, the complexity of the challenge, as we said earlier, really requires careful consideration as to what is the smart mixed tool of measures that need to be put in place that are going to contribute not only to basically look at the supply chains individually, but also have an impact on the ground, on the root causes of the problem and the challenge at hand. And I think for that, first and foremost, and it was mentioned earlier, again, engagement, dialogue with producing countries is of the essence, where this challenge and the need for capacity building is most acute. And I think helping developing countries, producing countries to further strengthen things like land use planning or governance, land tenure, and other underlying factors is really key. The EU, I think, as Mr. Shally also mentioned, has the opportunity to be leading an international level in the framework, I think, global commitments around biodiversity, on climate, but also through these trade agreements, trade and investments agreements. So how can we utilize those ways in order to basically continue having a reward sustainably produced agriculture and forestry products? And I think within a regulatory framework, so just to build on to complement implement this more political or trade-based, let's say trade and investment-based action. So we would encourage the EU probably to look further into, okay, how can we build consensus around definitions? Indeed, I mean, terms such as forest or due diligence or sustainability, what do they mean, so that we can all sing from the same song sheet and eventually, use the standards of measurements that are recognized at global level, so that we share common goals. Think developing greater social and environmental conditionality on conventional finance to also support a scaling up of green finance is very important. Considering, the appropriate use of certified or certification and verified sustainable supply chains. We heard earlier from Justin, I mean, there's not one single bullet, not one size fits all. I think there's a mix of measures that can help, but we need to be mindful in the way in which we utilize them to the goal that we have put ourselves. And also to make use of other supply chain strategies like traceability, what we mentioned. I mean, we're enhancing that in order to give more transparency and better understand the systems, monitoring landscape approaches with latest technologies. And I think indeed an appropriate mandatory due diligence system, which is commensurate to the objective that we're trying to achieve. And it needs to be one that is really ensuring that Europe is able to continue to exert leverage over the improvement of practices on the ground rather than drive market bifurcation. And so in conclusion, I think it's really policies that recognize global trade flows and that geared at improving both the livelihood of farmers of all sizes should be promoted in order to ensure forest protection within sustainable and inclusive development. Thank you. And with this, I'd like to now introduce Emily from Ethica. So over to you, Emily.
Hi, thank you very much, Marta. That was great and such a good precursor for our sort of little summary that Duncan and myself will provide. So very pleased to be here. Emily Fripp from Ethica, and with me Duncan Brack, who's an experienced policy development and analyst person who'll speak on some of our findings. So as Justin has so eloquently put, we've been convening over the last 6 months a number of roundtable meetings and reached out to a lot of the people that have been on this call today. We've had great participation from industry and associations and alliances. And what we produce is this discussion paper. It's sort of gathering insights from our findings. It's not aimed to be a position paper. I think this is important to say. It's the first step in this dialogue process. And as Hugo has stressed, there's many consultation processes going on starting now and over the next 6 to 12 months. And we do hope that this collection of industry thoughts and the industry groups that we've convened can continue in that guise of providing input and discussions along the way as these exciting developments take shape. Moving to the next sort of slide. A smart mix, we've heard this from Marta, from Hugo, from Justin. No individual company, civil society member, government can do this alone. We've got to work together. There's collective action. We need sort of to provide the right enabling environment. And that's both in the producer country, but also in the consumer country. There is so much that companies can do on their own, but without resolving governance, land use, the right trade frameworks, the right finance packages, having the right information at our fingertips, making those sort of moving to the next level, going beyond what they're already doing. And we've heard that Cargill's doing an awful lot. Well, how do we get that further? How do we sort of scale this up so that sustainability and legality become the norm? So we need to build on these existing processes and initiatives, and we need to find this smart mix and work in the right way. We've heard that there is no single bullet. Everybody sort of pins their hopes that maybe regulation or due diligence is going to solve this. Well, not without working with our partners and working collectively across other consumer countries, having consistent market messages and bringing in our producers and engaging and bringing them along with us. So the speed, there is a sense of urgency here, and I think that to me is why also a smart mix is really important. Developing a regulation and a piece of due diligence can take years, and I think we all feel that we don't necessarily have years and we want change to happen now. So let's be smart, look at what's available and look at how we can instigate many of these initiatives at the same time, but making sure they're talking to each other and we're learning and building on each other as processes. So moving into sort of some of our key findings, the number one outcome of our discussions was we can't do this without producer countries, and it's got to come, and we've got to work in partnership, and we've got to work with them and build on sort of inclusive open dialogue processes. there are many existing national initiatives going on, dialogues, we can learn from VPAs and trade processes. So how can we gather some of that, build on those initiatives and provide the right message and support from a consumer point of view? It's no point doing this alone. This isn't about Europe saying we want this and please deliver on it. It's about trying to resolve issues on the ground in a collective manner. We need a consistent, strong message from consumers. There's no point in just one country doing this alone. So therefore there's a call for let's work together. And there was a definite demand coming out of our meetings for mandatory due diligence. The devil is in the detail, and there's a lot still to work out. But realistically, everybody's saying, okay, we need a broad approach, but we might need commodity-specific legislation. So how can we package this together to get everybody moving in the right direction, but recognizing that different commodities are at different stages, and they will need different levels of support to move them along in that process. Build on the existing initiative, the existing definitions. There's a lot of work around criterion indicators, guidelines, OECD, IUCN, the Accountability Framework Initiative. There's a lot to learn and build on, and consistency is absolutely key. We don't want, industry doesn't want to have different member states, different pieces of regulation asking for different types of evidence. Support legal compliance on the ground. That's a fundamental basic, making sure that the sovereign rights of producers is respected. We're working with that. Resolving illegality and legality can take us a long way, but recognizing that industry and markets might want to go beyond that, might want to go further. We in Europe can't do this alone, and there's a way that we need to really galvanize with this sense of urgency. Let's use the Climate COP 26, the CBD in China over the next year. We've been given a bit of a year's grace if we look positively on the impact of COVID. So let's not lose it and make the most of what we've got now, so that in a year's time when we're talking about these processes, we've really got some results to show. What we can't afford to do is wait until those initiatives happen to then make decisions. Moving on to the next slide, I mean, finance. It's always the elephant in the room. How do we deal with it? And what industry really feels is needed is, again, a level playing field. Let's find a way to stop financing the unsustainable behavior. Finance positively sustainable practices. So we can regulate to get rid of the bad, but let's find the right incentives to support the good. Importantly, this needs to be done at scale, at speed, and one of the urgent things is how do we get the right money and money to the people on the ground where it needs to go. Access to finance from anything from an individual farmer, a small plantation, a corporate plantation, through the supply chain can be incredibly difficult. What then tends to happen is that there can be huge amounts of monitoring, reporting, data requirements to add into this mix, and that makes it incredibly hard to comply with. And as a finance institute investing in something, it becomes very difficult to understand and interpret. They're not technical experts in this. So how can we make this package of finance accessible and workable to achieve the goals we need to do? And as I sort of stressed, this is about having credible, robust systems for verification. It's got to undermine everything, underpin it. So we need to sort of build on what's already there, look at the traceability, transparency. Cargill's doing a lot, so are many other companies, and Bart from Nestle will talk about what they're doing. There's great new innovation. There's always new tools coming along, Earth observations, blockchain, worker voice tools, using lots of different apps. Well, let's capture that. Let's not limit ourselves to what we can do now, but let's think about what we can do over the next 5 years. Technology evolves incredibly quickly, so let's put the challenge to them to work for solutions, but let's work on things that are practical, pragmatic, and can support these broader initiatives. So that in a very quick nutshell is what we've been doing, and it is this about sequencing and doing it collectively and together. And so please go to the discussion paper. But Duncan, I'm quickly going to ask you to sort of come in here and well, there were many things we didn't discuss and many things that we sort of touched on, but the devil's in the detail, as I've sort of said, and there are a few things that I think you could just allude to as to where we think we should go next with some of the conversations.
Yeah, thanks very much, Emily. So I hope you'll have the chance to look at the paper, which has just been put on the website. You'll see that about half of it is dealings with the first two issues here, producer partnerships and demand-side measures. It's what we spent most time on in the roundtables. And we do go into some detail on some of the issues. Other ones we raise for worthy of further discussion, which we hope you'll have the chance to do later in the year or come up through the European Commission process. So just to highlight a few of them, we spent a bit of time talking about the whether the VPA type, the voluntary partnership agreement type of a model can be replicated for agricultural commodities. And there are many things to admire about the process, about that model. It establishes multi-stakeholder deliberative processes in the producer countries. It opened up the sector to transparency and scrutiny. It places the standard which is trying to be achieved in the hands of the producer country itself. But it is also a slow and resource-intensive process, and there is some doubt whether it is really likely to be acceptable or welcome to other countries and other commodities, apart from cocoa and West Africa, where there seems a real chance of pursuing this kind of discussion. So we talked about what the alternatives to that are, whether it's possible to try and put in place some of those elements, multi-stakeholder deliberative processes, traceability systems, and so on, within subnational jurisdictions. And whether the EU can support that kind of measure, or whether there are alternative frameworks like free trade agreements or investment agreements or EPAs, economic partnership agreements, that could achieve some of the same aims in promoting sustainable ways of supporting agriculture. Demand-side measures, unsurprisingly, we spent a lot of time on due diligence, and there was a very clear consensus, I think, in favour of mandatory EU-wide due diligence legislation, both on the horizontals or the broad corporate due diligence, but also that by itself would not be enough. And I think probably pretty much everybody involved in discussions would recognise the need for more specific, commodity-specific criteria. And as Emily said, going beyond legality and encompassing a wider range of criteria. But there is quite a strong need now, I think, to discussions to start taking place on exactly what those criteria are. What do we mean by deforestation free? What do we mean by human rights abuses? How precisely can these be defined in the context of the particular supply chains we're talking about? There is also the question of what can actually be enforced practically. Are we enforcing the exercise of due diligence or the possession of a due diligence system by the companies we're talking about, or is it kind of a mixture of both? And is this a standard of commodity production we're aiming at, or is it a process that through which the companies go through? Some quite big issues involved there, and of course everyone is keen that in putting in place this kind of legislation, we're not encouraging companies to simply abandon high-risk sources. We want to see the process of continued engagement with suppliers and helping them to clean up their own supplies. So there's quite a lot of discussion there in the paper, and I'll recommend you look at it. We touch more briefly on other demand-side measures within the European Union that can support this, like public procurement policy, possible reform of competition law to enable companies to collaborate more on a non-competitive basis in pursuit of public goods like sustainability. Finance and verification we did touch on, but in rather less detail, and Emily kind of outlined the main issues. For finance, it's a mixture of how we can steer finance towards sustainable solutions. Is there a role for climate finance funds, RED+, etc.? The bigger question, because the size of the funds are bigger, is how can we regulate the grey finance that goes into the agricultural sector that has no sustainability conditions imposed on it at the moment? So what kind of mechanisms can we use? Is it possible to use a due diligence mechanism for financial institutions? And then verification underlies all of this. Companies, competent authorities, and so on have to have ways of distinguishing between products produced to the standards we want to see and those which aren't. So is there a role for national standards under development in some of these companies? Is there a role for certification? And there are now a lot of different sources of information and data and intelligence on all these things, and we identify the role for the EU to play a central coordinating point. And indeed, the proposal for an EU observatory is in the deforestation communication, and that was very much welcomed by our participants. So I think that's enough from me. That's a very quick run through of the questions. I'll hand back to Emily.
Thanks very much, Duncan. And so I think you can see it's been a very rich and diverse conversation over sort of a series of 10 webinars, and we do hope that this is useful and food for thought for ongoing process and dialogue to move forward. And it's obviously this package is key. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Bart, the Vice President of Corporate Communications and Government Relations with Nestle Europe, Middle East and North Africa, to tell us a little bit about what they've been up to. Over to you, Bart.
Yeah, thank you, Emily, and also thank you to Duncan for giving such a good and quick summary of what is in front of us. And let me add a few perspectives, because I think first of all, let's remember, I think we are all aligned to stop deforestation. Marta said it as well. We are now at 90% by the end of the year. We will be at 90% deforestation free. And we hope to reach the 100% within the next 3 years. So, but what to do more? And I think, Emily, Duncan, you said it already, and I will say it again, maybe in another word, because we are summertime. So I would say we need a cocktail of smartly mixed EU policy measures, probably. And let me maybe start with the first ingredient that Duncan already raised, the mandatory due diligence. For me, basically, the main advantage is that everybody will have the same rules. So you work together as a consequence to identify, to transform, to report, and to learn together, but also to boost the technology. And that was a very good point made already. We work, for example, with blockchain, but also with satellite imagery. Now we have 100% of our palm oil supply chain through the monitored from the sky, I would say, receiving the alerts, sharing the alerts as well, not only with the suppliers to address the situation, but also to, with other companies, and we have set up a collaboration on that. So I think that's also a clear point that everybody could do with the legislative framework. But as Duncan pointed out, I think as every cocktail, when it's badly mixed, it could also lead to a bad hangover. And I would say the litigation element could be really a sticky point and a watch out, because when due diligence becomes just a litigation tool, it will lead to a number of things that we should in the first place avoid. Companies being less transparent, companies not afraid and disengaging from certain risky areas. And this is where actually we just need to address and need to transform the practices. So let's not fall into that trap. And I think that's an important contribution of the report, to find indeed that right balance. We know it's not a quick win. We know it's not a silver bullet. It needs resources, it needs time, but it transforms the supply chain. And that brings me also to the second element of the second ingredient of the cocktail, the smart mix cocktail, the bilateral partnership agreements that were mentioned as well. Let us talk very openly here. I feel that maybe we don't say it enough, but the key point is that farmers and their family should earn a good and decent living. So, and in that framework, we need to give them the incentives to protect their forests. And this requires clearly some support of the local producer countries in education, proper education, land use planning, agriculture practices. All of this can be included in these partnership agreements or other types of similar agreements that Duncan mentioned before. And they can actually build on what we are doing already with many companies in different fields. For example, this week from Nestle side, we launched a project in Côte d'Ivoire in cocoa. We talked about cocoa, where Duncan said it's probably in those countries that we can strike these voluntary partnership agreements. So let's do that. We are working there with the government already and with a foundation, Earthworm Foundation, to restore and protect the Cavally forest. Maybe not known to you, but it's a reserve that is a huge biodiversity hotspot under threat now, where we will not only support to stop the deforestation or reforest, but very important. We will work with the farmers because some of them are producing now inside the reserve, to basically agree with the government, okay, where can they farm outside of the reserve, and where doesn't it has a threat to biodiversity. So this is clearly where the government needs to step in. We are trying to build that. When there would be a framework that the EU is pushing, this would even be easier. And so just my conclusion is, let's try, when we want to achieve deforestation-free supply chains, find the balance between protecting the forests and the livelihoods of the farmers. When we have those two right, we will have deforestation-free supply chains, I'm sure. So I hope you liked the cocktail that I prepared for you, and wish you also a good summer.
Thank you very much, Bart, for sharing this cocktail, and thanks also to the other speakers for your insights into what you're doing respectively. I'd like to turn now to a civil society perspective, to Indra van Gisbergen, who is a forest and development campaigner at FERN. FERN is one of the most prominent civil society organization working on forest policy at the EU level, and Indra has also been actively involved in the TFA EU roundtables. Indra, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nicole, for this, and also thank you a lot for TFA for giving us this great opportunity to participate at this dialogue. FERN indeed is an organization who's been working for many, many years in trying to contribute in making the EU work for forests and people. And so we've been delighted also to be actively participating at the roundtables discussions, which we believe have been quite successful in bringing lots of actors together, civil society actors as well as the businesses, and creating a platform really to have a constructive dialogue. And so we're very happy also that quite an important part of the the private sector has been embracing also the EU communication on this topic, which is out a year ago. And so the momentum is there also for adopting or pushing or accepting or recognizing the value of regulation now. And so that is out now, it's the talk of the town. And we indeed are very happy that everybody sees very clearly it cannot stand on its own, and we need more. We need collective action from all actors here in Europe, across also across the world, and also in producing countries. But as said before, there is a lot that we still have to do. This is the beginning of a conversation, and so super that also Justin and others have already underlined this is the start of the conversation, and that it will be followed up probably in 2021, but even beyond, because also that we want to see the implementation of also the regulations and so on. So we definitely think it's so important we have on the one hand a corporate broad due diligence regulations, and that is also supported by a number of organizations rather in human rights from the human rights area, and a forest focused regulation. So we definitely think it's very important all actors are involved in this regulation, and for example certain suggestions to have a phased approach whereby some sectors which may be not so ready than others could have the opportunity to opt out. We definitely think that that is not a good idea. The main drivers of deforestation and these sectors should be involved, and so the regulation that we're preparing and hope to see in 2021 should apply to all different sectors, and leave it open maybe to extend it after some years. Furthermore, we also think it is quite, well, we've been asked to be focusing or say something about how to raise the ambitions of the private sectors, and we do have a number of ideas which we hope we will be able to discuss with you all more in depth later on. And so one of the key elements is that so far the discussion has been among European actors, and so as we are addressing very complex situations, we definitely, the sooner the better, also involve the actors in producing countries. not only the governments, but also civil society actors, companies, smallholders, and so on. And maybe in the country or in the regions create these kind of platforms where we can talk. And maybe TFA can have also a role there. Moreover, we also think it's great there is so much appetite for due diligence regulation, but not everybody is still on board or is really part of the discussion. And we think about the financial institutions, the financial actors, the bank pensions funds, who are key actors in the investment, which are often leading to land grabbing. So it would be at the next stage so important to also have them on board and develop really detailed tools how to overcome or to ensure that future investment is protecting forests as well as people. Also, the rubber sector should be have a more prominent role in this debate. Marta already said, and others said as well, that we have to continue and use existing tools such as certification maybe. But I would like to flag here also the fact that there is a new study out, multi-stakeholders initiative study, which examined or revealed that a lot of certifications are not really fit for purpose and do not really manage to create a transformative change we all want to see. So there are definitely limits. And so the question would be, is there an option that companies rethink maybe the role of certification and the efforts and resources that go in there to develop them and make them work, if we all know that after so many years, they will not lead to really the transformation at a structural basis. And so maybe it's better also to rethink how to put most of the efforts in getting prepared to really implement due diligence regulation. Furthermore, of course, Duncan said it, that partnerships may not work for all commodities. However, let's not jump too quickly to conclusions and maybe try out the options for other commodities, whereas we do have, for example, for the rubber sector, which is of course different, but they're not really involved. So probably it's too early to really come to the conclusion it will not work. So let's really put all the efforts in making it work. If that is not working, what can companies do? There is a lot they can do. And that was tackling the root causes of the deforestation, as Marta also pointed out. And what does that mean exactly? That means, amongst others, improving transparency. And transparency can be done in already following the rule of law and implementing the laws, because today there is still a lot of illegal deforestation. And so what we want to achieve is address the legality, but also sustainability. But the bare minimum is to respect the laws in the country. And another element is, for example, today we see that a lot of human rights and environmental rights defenders suffer a lot from corporate abuse. And that is, again, something that companies could do, is offer protection and trust, and build the trust and the relationship with the human rights and environmental rights defenders, who are in fact also important watchdogs today. Improving livelihoods, that's the last point I would like to touch. Bart already mentioned it as well, that it is key to protect forest and people, and also ensure that they do have a decent revenue. And there too, there is a lot to be done beyond capacity building of smallholders, especially women. I really think that is super important, but also implement some existing benefit sharing mechanisms that have been agreed. We see, for example, see in the timber sector that often these written benefits sharing agreements are not implemented at all. And again, that comes back to the point on the rule of law. Then a final point on how to improve livelihoods and contribute to poverty reduction, in fact, and contribute to development. Maybe it's also to rethink the model of industrial production. I know that is maybe sensitive, but yeah, some companies do think about it, and how can we introduce agroecology, for example, in the way production is done. I would like to point at a very recent piece of research of IPES, whereby the former UN rapporteur on food has contributed, and really calls upon improvement or stepping up investment on research for agroecology, so we can also scale it up. And agroecology is something that can serve the environment as well as people. So thank you very much, and I really look forward to next discussions.
Thank you,
And
Indra.
so I would like to give now the floor to Eva. Eva.
I will do that. Thank you, Indra. It's my pleasure now to introduce Eva Majewski, who is a Senior Policy Officer at Germany's Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ. And in the context of Germany's presidency of the Council of the EU for the second half of 2020, BMZ has also been holding its own series of webinars on EU deforestation policy that are very complementary to TFA's efforts. So Eva, we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for having us joining the discussion today. Indra was saying very much we are at the beginning of a discussion, and I must say that's very much true, because there's still a long way, I think, ahead of us. However, at the moment the stars are very well aligned, and you might blame it on my youth that's slowly disappearing, but nonetheless we are already celebrating today the first anniversary of the EU communication of deforestation. So I think it's a good point to take stock of what really has happened, and I think there is a sense of urgency nonetheless, even though Indra was saying we're just at the beginning of the discussion. If we look at it more closely, so I think for everyone it's very much clear that not just because of COVID and the climate discussions, there is no way for business as usual. We have seen this very much in Germany. We had a national process that was looking, it was actually called the National Action Plan for Business and Human Rights. And we've just concluded this, the threshold to see if 50% of German companies meet requirements in due diligence to report with human rights and on deforestation issues was really not reached. I think it's slightly below 20% even of those who reported back, where you would say they report at a sufficient level. So this is really one thing where now we are entering also a national discussion, whether or not or which regulation our companies should need. It's very much put forward by our minister as well as the German Minister for Labor, Hubertus Heil, and also the Chancellor is already very supportive of introducing measures, and also those including then mandatory due diligence. What else? I think we have a very, when it comes really to due diligence on human rights and the environment, especially deforestation, we think to have a level playing field and do it on a European level is way more efficient. Luckily, there is already a guideline.
Eva, I think you just went on mute. Could you please unmute yourself again?
Okay,
yes,
thank you. I don't know what happened here.
Thank you.
Yeah, happy to be back then, or that you can hear me again. So for us, it's important to see that there is no silver bullet in just one measure, and that it needs to be a smart mix or a cocktail. As Art said, this with respect to regulatory measures, we had our series of virtual fora that we concluded yesterday, as you mentioned, and for us, we have a toolbox really from a German perspective. So we also had now in April approved guidelines on the promotion of deforestation-free supply chains. So we see that it's really a momentum we are building up, that we are holding on a national level, and where we feel that it has also reached now the public in a more urgent state than before, and that we can use this easily also on the European level. Now, I was referring to the point whether are we really at the beginning of discussions or not, because I think we need to act quickly because the trees that are gone are gone. And it's important to look at the sphere of control and sphere of influence that we really have. So I think, yes, there need to be measures taken, such as due diligence and so on and so forth, on when we see what are we importing to Europe, so what can we really control, what can we also do with companies, with the private sector. But it's for us very important that we think of our sphere of influence, if we want to call it this way. So really, how can we influence through smart cooperation work what is being done with partner countries? And I think this is where we as BMZ, our partners in the ADP as well, come in with experience, but where we have high hopes for what has been announced by DG DEFCO in the EU forest partnerships. So we really hope that this is gonna add to the momentum. And maybe to almost conclude, to say what do we really have in line as a German presidency. So we are really happy to see that the impact assessment is being undertaken by DG Envy so fiercely and so holistic. I think it's good if we take this 1 or 2 extra months maybe in the end. But then coming up with a really smart solution, because I think if we just rush now a little bit too much and then come up with a cocktail that doesn't really fit the taste buds, we haven't achieved anything. And this is, I think, just this one opportunity that we have now. And I think it might also must be very smart. After the summer, we will present a new study also from German side on a possible smart mix for human rights and deforestation. And we are planning currently to also introduce this study alongside when the multi-stakeholder partnership on European level is forming for the first time and meeting. And then also if there might be already preliminary results from the impact assessment by DG Envy, or the discussions in European Parliament and the reports, we also want to take this up in the working group CODEF in the council, so that we really accompany it as well as possible to keep the momentum. And for us, I think what is very nice to see in the discussion, not just today, but in all the TFA discussions we have, the engagement really of the private sector, because this is, from our perspective, a crucial addition to carry through any effective measures that we hope to implement very soon.
Thank you very much. So we have about 10 minutes for Q&A, a bit less. There's been a number of questions in the chat that relate to the need to address rights issues for indigenous people, livelihoods. There's been questions about premiums for farmers. So I think that instead of answering each one of them in turn, as we won't be able to do that, what I'd like to do is there is a question of how can EU legislation support these efforts to include, to address these rights issues. So I'd like to first ask some of the speakers to answer this from the private sector, and then Mr. Chalet will ask you to maybe provide your comments as part of your final reflections at the end. So I'm just wondering whether Marta or Bart or Duncan, or whether anyone wants to take that question on, how do we make sure that these issues are addressed?
Thank you. Maybe I'll go. And indeed, I think we've touched upon the deforestation, very much focusing on environment, but human rights, and anything to do with the social type of rights is really equally as important. So I think it's really, for companies like us, is really our commitments on human rights and enhanced grievance mechanisms as well connected to this across our supply chain. So this is what we do, and really following, in line with the UN guiding principles on human human rights and the ILO guidelines. So, and I think when it comes to legislation, it's indeed, I think it's the other side of the coin. So probably now I will let the Commission speak, but I think at the same time that we're tackling the environment with all these due diligence processes and others, I mean, there's a need to also look into the social aspects. Yeah.
No, I fully aligned on what Marta said. Also for our company, what we do in a voluntary way, due diligence at this stage and already for more than a decade. Actually, it has started with human rights and environmental due diligence together. So I think that's very important to consider, as I mentioned, and also somebody asked specifically, okay, how does that come in? I think at European level, we should indeed see collaboration between the different DGs to tackle not only environmental aspects, but also social human rights aspects in the policy mix.
So I would just add to that, if I may, that this is an absolutely key issue for most forest risk commodities. And it kind of highlights the point that you do need to be quite detailed about the due diligence criteria in whatever the legislation is, because issues of land rights and land tenure, land access are not always very clearly spelt out in the kind of international human rights instruments. So a broad horizontal approach that just talks about human rights without specifying what it means is not likely to be adequate, and you need legislation to specify more clearly what you want. Now that's the first stage. Of course, whatever criteria you put for the due diligence process also have to be enforceable. So you then have to, companies have to be clear what they have to do, whether these are built into a due diligence system, whether they have to exercise due diligence, where is the enforcement biting, and you have to work out which agency is capable of monitoring whether or not their system is adequate. So there might be a role for third-party auditing of due diligence systems, as we will see in the conflict minerals regulation, and also clearly there has to be a role for some kind of complaints mechanism in the countries where these potential rights abuses are going on. Somebody has to be able to raise the problem with the enforcement agency. So I'm sorry, that's lots of questions that need to be addressed, but these are the kind of debates we should be having now about the shape of the due diligence legislation.
And can I just then add as a first, just to me this really resonates to the need to work with producer countries and on the ground and learn what works there and get their engagement, and it's got to come from our partnerships and not be something that's written and imposed on by Europe. So I think sort of learning by doing and getting engagement is really fundamental in this.
Thank you. Indra, would you also like to comment on this point?
Yeah, I think what previous people have said, I can only agree on this. Yeah, agree about this on redress and access to justice tools. That is absolutely key. Yeah, that is something, for example, in certification schemes that is weaker. So that really should be quite robust in a due diligence mechanism. And I would think also that the guidance from the EC is really key. Guidance of all of us to make this work. Enforcement is really the thing. I mean, it should not be an instrument on paper, but an instrument in practice. And probably as it's going beyond legality, that's what everybody really thinks is necessary. It's very new, so it's going also beyond the EUTR and so on. And so in the 5 years to come, there is a lot of learning to be done. And so it's super important that this dialogue between all actors is open, but there is also robust coaching from the EC of companies, of smallholders, and so on in Europe, but also outside Europe. And maybe also involve other regions such as China and countries such as China and so on. So yeah, there is a lot of work to be done by all of us.
Thank you. And before turning to the European Commission, there's a couple more questions that have been upvoted. So I am going to take one of them for Cargill. Could you talk maybe very briefly, like in 1 minute, about the high-risk landscapes? And the question, I don't know if you've seen it, says, the risk-calibrated approach in reference to the 100% traceability, and what you mean by that more specifically.
It's a question to me, right, Nicole?
Yes, well, it's a question for Cargill, so I would imagine that you would want to answer.
Sorry, yeah, didn't hear. It was like a question for, so I was just making sure. Yeah, no, indeed, I think it's okay. I think maybe if I talk to the world of palm, so in palm oil, indeed, I mean, we have now this 93% traceability to the mill, and then the 48 to the let's say to the production. So it's really looking into how do you define those high risk areas where the action there is most needed, and that's what we try to work with, also with the civil society, with other groups like WRI, to identify, to have objective criteria that is helping us determine what are those high risk areas in which we need to concentrate most of our efforts. Because at the end of the day, that's the thing. I mean, we can look at the 100% and have everything covered by traceability, but really maybe there are areas that are not of concern. So it's by doing that, it helps us really being more focused and really trying to understand what are those specific areas that need most attention, working with third parties. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sure there's much more to say about that, but thank you. Mr. Shally, I would like to turn to you as reflections on everything you've heard, and particularly this last question on how the EU Commission will be also making sure to address these issues of rights. And you know, there was this question about supporting premiums going to farmers in third countries. So we'd like to hear your reflections and closing comments. And just one thing, we'd like to keep 2 minutes if possible at the end, just on next steps. Thank you.
Usually just listening to whatever this discussion, usually I take about 45 minutes to introduce the whole range of issues that we want to address with regard to forests under the whole complex of European Green Deal. And when listening to the debate today, we have been addressing or asking that how will the Commission and by extension the EU address issues across the board, which means we're talking about the European Green Deal and the green recovery. In general terms, we're talking about the implementation of the biodiversity strategy, the farm to fork strategy, the deforestation communication, and of course, a myriad of actions that would be taken under the auspices of DG DEFCO, Agri, Sante, Just Trade, RTD, JRC, and have you. So I think there is a whole system to be constructed. And I think that when you go into the different initiatives that we have in the policy papers I referred to, you will have bits and pieces coming out of the programming of the future cooperation instruments after in the next multi-annual financial framework. And Eva already referred to the forest partnerships that our colleagues from DG DEFCO are developing together with the other services that are interested in that, and which link in with biodiversity partnerships, climate partnerships, agricultural partnerships, which all will have a link to the issue of how to make the transformation of the agricultural sector in third countries easier, and to provide incentives for them to switch to those better practices. And I think that we also have clear strategies and initiatives in Farm to Fork, how to make a transformation of the food and drink sector in the EU to make them more responsive to those needs. And we have clear policies in the Circular Economy Action Plan follow-up that link to how products should be shaped, what type of claims can be made with regard to environmental issues. So I think there is a huge amount of work that is ongoing. And I think that in the further work, we mainly need to focus from the Commission side to make sure that all this moves forward, so in harmony and coherence, so that we don't work at cross purposes. So that's one of the things that occupies us a lot currently. And I think that it was also very helpful that many of you said, well, we need certain approaches that would come through horizontal guidance or horizontal legislation that covers general corporate and company business models and activities, the responsibilities of boards and managers to take into account certain things generally. And there what might be the need, and that's what we're working on, to do something very specific on specific products that are particularly prone to be associated with deforestation and forest degradation. And I think that what we have to work on, and I think it's come out very clearly in what you're saying, is we have to work on what are the best instruments to do that when we go back to specific products and value chains. What will deliver the best impact on the ground? To what extent can we extend experiences with legality to sustainability? What has the process of voluntary partnership agreements delivered in the 15 odd years that we have managed it? Is it effective and efficient to do it that way? Isn't it better to integrate it into the implementation and negotiation of free trade agreements and to have it dealt with there? How is the complementarity between demand side measures taken at the European level and support measures that come through instruments such as the future neighborhood and development cooperation instruments, where the programming is happening and into which the DEFCO is working with the EU delegations to provide the basis for having national flagships, national initiatives in countries of that kind. So you'll see on that the 4 priorities or the sectors of the deforestation communication have been rolled over very effectively into different components of the European Green Deal. They are being implemented, and when you read the Commission work program for the next 2 years, you see a lot of work happening in that regard. Now, I think that drilling it down to something that we have committed to deliver in Q1 of 2021, which is demand side measures. We are in the process, as I said, of doing the impact assessment. A lot of good advice and additional information is being forwarded to us, which of course will all be taken into account as appropriate in the impact assessment process. There will be a possibility to contribute by joining the open public consultations, which will be open as of August. We will have the first meeting of the multi-stakeholder platform in beginning of October, which includes partners from third countries. And based on that will be in very close cooperation with a dialogue on sustainable cocoa that we're doing together with DG Trade and DG DEFCO, and where one will feed into the other. And there will be findings, and I think I said that at the very beginning, we hope to have initial findings on what we consider to be viable, effective, and proportionate options towards the end of the year. And I think that that will be, I'm sure, and I'm convinced, it will be hugely disappointing to all of you, because we will not be able to deal with everything you have raised here. So we will have something that deals with specific mandate being given through the deforestation communication. But if you look at the impact assessment process, we're dealing with one output and one deliverable of the deforestation communication, which is to be seen together with a myriad of activities by in the partnership with producing countries, in multilateral fora, in working with research and development, in working on monitoring. So I think we will have to remind ourselves always that there are a good number of processes around that will take care of one of the other element that probably you will find missing in that regard. Now, I think that what I can say is that we will count on all of you to remain your active engagement, to giving us, as you have done over the last couple of months and years, all your pieces of mind and your advice on what we should do. And I think one of the key discussions we will have is what is deforestation and what is forest degradation, and how can you actually quantify it, monitor it, so that it is actually manageable for the market operators and participants to comply with the obligations that we will establish. And there will be a direct relationship between the clarity of the definition and the stringency of the measures that we may be able to propose. Secondly, we will have to come to an understanding what we actually mean by due diligence, because looking at the different contributions we've had, everybody's saying due diligence, and then you go into the details and it can mean many things to many people. It can mean very little and it can mean very much. So I think one of the things that we're looking for is proposing something that brings change, not just transcribing current practices into law, and to have real impact in the field and on the market and in the behavior of producers, transformers, retailers, and consumers along the way. And of course, we also need to take into account that we may have gathered experience in the last 10 years in the implementation of instruments that have been created using the concept of due diligence, where we have come to realize that certain things don't work as we initially thought they would, that they don't work with the legal systems that we have in the majority of member states, and to see why it didn't work. So the question will be, even if it was due diligence, will we have to redefine due diligence for the purpose of sustainability? So I think it cannot be the same that we have for legality as we know now. And of course, there's also the question to what degree the EU will actually go beyond certain hesitations that we had at the time of EUTR with regard to clearly identifying jurisdictions where we think there are problems with deforestation or not. It's something that we didn't do in the context of legality. I think it's a challenge. It's hugely challenging. And I think that we envy all those who already have come to the conclusion of what works and what doesn't work. We haven't come to any conclusion yet. We are looking at it with a very open mind. We're also working very closely with the European Parliament, with the MEPs, and with the Impact Assessment Unit in the European Parliament Secretariat. And I think that all of that should, by the end of this year, enable us to come forward with a robust report that will be the basis for a proposal that can be the basis of the further discussions with the co-legislators, namely the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament. So that's a few reflections. Don't tempt me to speak more because I will blow your time scale apart. But thank you very much for allowing me to listen in to the many contributions that have been made by colleagues today. It was good to listen to so many good friends and colleagues that I've worked with over the years, and also to see so many well-known people in the audience. So I think that was a useful opportunity to interact. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shally. And indeed, there's lots more to discuss. Thank you all for your contributions. TFA will continue to play its role in bringing a constructive multi-stakeholder and private sector voice into this dialogue. And we have to close now, unfortunately, because we could go on. But what we will do is we will send a summary to everybody with next steps. So thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you.